Hello, everybody, and welcome to Bright Founders Talk at Temy. Temy is an international software development company that designs, builds, and delivers software for sustainable businesses and promising startups. Welcome to our podcast, where we bring you the most inspiring stories of entrepreneurs and experts in the software development industry. And each week, we interview successful leaders who share their unique journeys and valuable insights. I'm your host, Barry, and today we're joined by an amazing guest, Dima Grossman, who is co-founder and CTO at Novu. Hello, Dima. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, very good to be here. Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming. So first question, just tell us a little bit about yourself and your history.
Yeah, so I'm Dima, married with a small dog, which is somewhere outside of the room. If you might be disturbing, that's just preparing you. So I've been kind of in my entrepreneurial journey for the past, I would say, 10 years now. I've kind of shifted my focus from music when I was a little bit younger. Realized it's a little bit challenging to make a living out of music, so we kind of did a pivot to building stuff, which has a lot of correlations actually, which is quite interesting to see. And I've met my co-founder Tomer Bernau, who've been working with for the last 10 years now. And our first company was kind of a bootstrap company. We started from the garage together, which was a lot of the learning curve was quite interesting there. And we can touch about this a little bit later. But we've sold the first company and then started another business, which was a little bit less successful than the first one. And then Novu, which is where we are currently at, which is our latest kind of journey for the past, I would say, almost 3.5, or almost, I would say 4 years, if you take kind of the whole range. And I've been always kind of in the paths between, the go-to-market, the marketing aspects of it, and the technological elements of it. So this is kind of, being an early stage founder, you kind of do a little bit of everything. And yeah, that's, I guess, my life for the past, I would say, 10 years now is kind of on this realm between building and kind of putting things to the market, seeing the reactions.
It's very interesting that you mentioned pivoting from a musician to like a chief technology officer. How you mentioned that there's some kind of overlap or correlation between the two. I'm really curious, what might that correlation be?
So for me, it's kind of, looking at I was always a band type of person, right? I'm not doing like a solo musician or something like this. For me, it always a band is a lot like a team in a startup or a team in an early stage company or in a little bit later. Like it's all about the people, right? To find the like-minded people who share the same passion. When everybody has, a counterpart, which this is their responsibility, this is what they do. A lot of times they see founders, like two co-founders, both are drum players, right? Which, in some rare cases it works, but you usually have to complement each other in a way, like in the team and kind of the type of talent you are working with. And then there is a lot of the competition is crazy, all chances against you. There is this dream of making it big, which is usually harder than it sounds. And we've been doing a lot of, in my music journey, we've been an unsigned band, which we did a lot of the marketing ourselves, kind of, YouTube, the producing. So you kind of have to wear quite a lot of hats. And I think when building the startup, you kind of always have to be this kind of creative mode about how, okay, you've built something amazing, you've recorded a great album, now nobody knows about it. What's the next stage? So I think there is quite a lot of similarities, and a lot of my very good friends are actually kind of also in the programming industry or like just founders who's for some part of their early career was also in music, which I find quite interesting.
And so tell me a little bit about the company, Novu.
So Novu is an open source notification platform, and really what we started as something that we've experienced ourselves in our previous two companies, which is basically, you use Stripe for billing, you use, other tools like, Cleric or Auth0 for authentication, and you kind of grab those SaaS components and plug it in because, there is quite a lot of depth into them. It might start simple, but then it kind of grows quite significantly. And notifications were always this part of our products that we had to build from scratch, right? So we, you kind of start simple. Something happens, let's send an email, and usually, SendGrid or Twilio are the first tools that come into mind. And then the product grows. You might want to introduce a notification center component inside of your application or service. And then, users might want to have a user preference behind it. And then, okay, what happens if your product goes viral and you suddenly get, hundreds of notifications to the user inbox? They don't want that. It's a better user experience. So it all kind of grows from there. And this was really I would say, the starting point for us to build Novu, really. And we had quite an interesting journey kind of coming from the open source realm where we didn't thought initially it was a tool for developers, but we kind of came to the realization after testing and kind of a small journey in the wrong direction, and then we corrected fast enough. But in general, we're building an API to help developers integrate notification experiences in their products. And we are doing this over kind of the open source, I would say, go-to-market, which we've been very passionate about and quite excited doing for the past 3 or 4 years now.
I think open source is like a really interesting part of the technology development fields. What are like some of the challenges of trying to monetize open source projects?
So, one of the first counterintuitive things when I tell, people, parents, friends, what do you do? And like, yeah, we build this huge company and everything is available, like all of our source code is available, and they immediately go, blue face, like, well, why? Why would you do that? And, for us, we had a few, kind of core principles that we tried to follow when starting Novu. And for us, building an infrastructure layer or a platform layer, like a strong technology piece, we realized that we don't know everything, right? And I think one of the early stories of us at Novu, we started as maybe like a 5 or 10 lines of code GitHub repository with a huge blog post about, what it could be one day. And that's where kind of everything kind of exploded for us, because we had a lot of people who've been related to the problem, right? It's not only the technology, but the challenges of waking up in the middle of the night because your system is broken and sending hundreds of thousands of notifications to users. It's not a pleasant experience. Now, going into the open source direction, there's a lot of the things that the problems are quite simple to comprehend. How if all the code is available, how do you actually monetize it? Because anybody can just take it or host it, etc., and so on and so on. And there's different models to take this apart. There's huge companies, like Red Hat, or like there's companies like MongoDB. There's like the open core, the open source code available. There's different models around it. And when we started, it was even a little bit more blurry than today. I think it's kind of becoming a little bit more of a norm with more and more open source companies coming into the field, and it kind of becomes a little bit more of an established. But for us, it's always been, the value for the developer is out there, available as an open source platform. The code is available. As a developer, you can get the value of it. But when the value shifts more towards the business or like the business or organization or other type of personas within the organization, this is where we have our own cloud, basically hosted version of Novu, which is a turnkey solution. You sign up, get an API key, and you don't have to care about scale. You don't have to think about security, and it just works model. And there is a bunch of other companies that follow similar model, and we found it, kind of a very good balance between being open with the community to get the feedback back to the product, and also, create a sustainable business model for us to keep investing the time and making the product better on the other end. So it has to find this, equilibrium in the end that works for both sides.
So you mentioned the community there. Like, how important is it for the community in open source projects?
So I think, in my opinion, it's one of the most important things, right? You can put any product source code out there, and it's like, a tree fell in the forest and nobody knows about it, because in my opinion, to build a community, it's kind of an organic thing that happens, right? And there is my personal point of view about community is like, fostering a garden that you cannot, put twice as much water on it and then it will grow. You kind of have to create the right atmosphere, the right ambience for what's happening there. But the starting point, really the core of it, is the cause, right? Is the problem you are trying to solve is relatable? And do developers deeply care about the problem that you are trying to do? Because other than that, they will not spend time, like solving problems or issues or running into, kind of contributing code if there is, in the root of it, there is no like real connection to the problem or to the cause you're trying to do. And to me, this is really I would say, the starting point.
And like, what strategies do you employ to kind of help maintain like a thriving open source ecosystem?
So, first of all, is as a company, we try to be as transparent as it can. So it's not only, internally with how we work with our internal employees, but this is, our whole handbook is public. If we can put a link a little bit out there later, but handbook.novu.co, all of our internal processes, how we do things, everything is transparent and visible. So it's not only the code, but this is a mentality we're trying to foster within the organization itself. Right. So not, with meeting notes, trying to be as loud as we can about, how we do things, why we do them, to really create this relation, I would say, between, our community and our team. And sometimes the lines become a little bit blurry, right? So you have, we have some people who've been contributing to our open source project who started to work with us because, the synergy was amazing. And then kind of it was the most natural transition just to keep working together, in a little bit more of a closed, kind of tight relationship, I would say. And for us, kind of always thinking about what there is the code out there. How do you access it? Do you understand it? Is it accessible enough? How friendly are you to the people who are contributing code, right? And this is something, it's not always easy. It's quite a lot of investment and still going on. And we always feel like, it's something we might do better in specific areas. But I think the general line there is, we deeply care about it, not only on the code aspect of the available code, which is on GitHub, but also how we operate as a company, how we, write features, how active are we on our community, Discord channel or GitHub and so on. So it's kind of a combined.
Lovely explanation. Thank you so much. So what are the risks of like open source projects being abandoned and like how do you mitigate those risks?
So I think an open source project, on one hand, it's kind of actually a good thing. We had quite a viral Reddit thread a few days back about, why do people even to choose to, like open source stuff and Salesforce, etc. And one of the main things there was, there is actually some level of confidence, if it's a commercial SaaS project, like a closed source project, and let's, be honest, we spoke about kind of the rockstar dream in the beginning. Majority of SaaS companies close, right? And for some of our biggest customers, one of the differentiating points for them was, hey, we know that in the worst case scenario that the company closes, we still can use the product, right? We can self-host it, we can migrate the data out. So there is some level of actually confidence, which is a little bit counterintuitive, to the sense, because, if something happens, we just kind of, there is a bunch of code we would potentially written ourselves, but we can still use it. We can still self-host it. And a lot of the times, if the cause and the root problem is big enough, the community, even if it closes or, it can be forked and continue basically living its journey as long as the problem is still there that, developers are trying to solve using this particular project or not.
Do you have any ethical considerations when you're operating like the open source software format?
So it actually makes the product, I would believe, more secure because, it's different than you are a closed source company and you may be, doing like your annual security audit or something like this. Our source code is actually available on GitHub and we kind of get thousands of eyes on it, right, each day. And I think this creates a little bit more of a secure platform. And you have to, obviously, there's like the best security practices, which you should follow even if you're doing a closed source solution in terms of, don't keep your secret keys public or stuff like this. It applies to any company, in my opinion. Being an open source company is just kind of forcing us to adhere to the best security standards out there. And again, in case there are some things that we've missed, we have a huge, kind of group of people who can see this and can tell, hey, folks, here's this potential security vulnerability, and we can openly disclose it, we can solve it and communicate around it, which is quite different if it would be a closed source solution where, there might be somebody found about it, but no one actually, published it or just exploding it as they go. So there is always like another layer, I would say, of security in it.
So I think I know how you're going to answer this question, but do you think that open source is the future of software development, or do you think proprietary models will have a tendency to dominate?
I'm a little bit more of a proponent. I'm not sure if this will be the reality or not, but this is the reality I would love to see. I would love to see a reality of open, code and open platforms. And I think, this drives growth, I think, across the board, right? Because we can learn from each other and we can just improve the quality of our software. And frankly, the whole team today is around, I would say, 13 or 14 people, something like this, and inside of Novu, and we have around 400 or 500 contributors on the open source, right? So this is almost like a 5x of what we can personally do as a group, right? So I would love to see a future, where code is available, it's ethical, right? We're done doing some shady stuff that you cannot know, right? It's everything is out there. And I'm seeing more and more, as I mentioned, when we started, it was quite hard to find examples to learn from. There was the big ones like Gitpod, but there's, a lot of like the open source databases, but there's not a lot of open source SaaS platforms or something like this we could learn from. And looking like in the past 3 or 4 years, it explodes quite significantly. And in a lot of areas, it kind of becomes even the norm in many cases. So I'm really happy about it.
Do you have any open source business models that you're trying to emulate, or are you trying to be more a pioneer in going in your own direction?
So I think, the established models like on the main, like the by the book models, right, they are there. So we're kind of having this, we have the source available, but we also a managed SaaS solution with specific models that are, not available to the general public, which we offer as a proprietary kind of areas for kind of the business personas we discussed previously. I found it very challenging because each company is quite unique. So the alterations and kind of what works for one company, I almost always find, like not always applicable to what necessarily we are doing or what somebody else is doing. This is where I always try to, when I'm speaking with founders, I can share you, my story and what worked for us and what didn't work for us. But, it's always a danger to just copy paste a specific playbook because you might not understand the circumstances or, the context under which this was successful. Maybe it's the time in history, or maybe it's a specific talent of people who were there, or the type of product, or the type of audience, or the problem. So I think, we're following kind of the general, I would say, kind of managed cloud solution approach, but I think we've found our, way into it and still are, looking into finding, kind of the best model that works for us specifically.
So you mentioned cloud there. So what role do cloud providers play in like open source, and especially in regards to monetization? And do you think that it's fair currently?
So, when it comes to, there's different layers of software, and I think the layer that like the huge cloud providers are currently not playing necessarily the most fair game, I would say, is, if you look at something like a database layer, like there's been a bunch of stories with Elastic and Mongo and Redis that's, this controversial license changes and that's happened there. And, on one hand, the cloud providers are not doing anything legally wrong. It's an MIT software or an Apache-based software, and they're basically running a managed solution. What was important for us, and it's a risk factor that's happening, and it's quite a real one for specific types of software. From what we've seen so far, with a little bit more of a product type software, right? It's not a database or something like a small layer. It has a user interface, a dashboard, and like multiple services running in. I haven't seen a lot of stories, kind of happen to I would say, the application level type of software that's been taken by cloud providers. So this is applicable a little bit more on specific type of software, which, is I think it's a big risk, and you have to think about it if you're building that type of business.
So looking at the market currently, are there any like tech trends that are currently catching your attention within the industry?
So one of the biggest, I wouldn't say maybe if it's a tech trend or not, but I think we all heard the term AI a few dozen times in the past year or two. One specific thing that I personally see, and we look and we see it in our customer audience as well, is that previously, you've been looking at the TAM, or like the total addressable market of developers or builders, as, I don't know, like, let's put a number like 1,000 something. And, in the last year, it kind of multiplies by multiple times. So you start to see more and more people getting into the builder's kind of hat that previously you might have a specific code access to it. And this changed the role of the tools and how we build tools. And for so many things, even SEO right now, we are seeing month over month growth of less and less Google, more and more Perplexity and ChatGPT referrals to our website, which kind of shifts our whole mentality about how we even think about SEO, like how people will search stuff. So there is a huge kind of all across the board impact, I would say, about the tech industry, in my opinion, that's happening right now. And more people have access to do things that previously they couldn't because they doesn't have necessarily technical skill or something like this.
Has the AI in this new development changed your focal points and impacted on things like ongoing projects or endeavors?
So, I personally not a huge fan of, doing AI for the sake of AI. So you would not find it, on our, I never say never, right? But yeah, I don't necessarily think that putting an AI everywhere is needed. Like AI should be helpful. It should do something. You might not even realize it's doing something behind the scenes, right? And most often we're building tool for developers, and the way developers build things is changing. So how they are going to build this today, right, or tomorrow, is how those AI agents or something this can interact with our product. So basically they're kind of an extension of the developer who is building something right now on top of Novo, for example. So this is really changes our mind about, kind of how do we treat APIs, how they are accessible to agents, our definitions is good enough, is our docs indexed properly by those types of tools. So there's a lot of, I would say, effects to it, but I would never kind of think about it as, oh, let's just use AI for notifications, whatever. It's like just not something I personally believe in. AI is a tool, right? And we just have to use the tool to solve specific problems for our customers. And this is what we're trying to do.
So I remember at the start of the podcast, you mentioned some of the challenges and you said we'd get back to it. So this is the opportunity now for me to ask that. So looking back at your career, what would you say the biggest challenge to date has been?
Wow, it's almost a roller coaster, I would say. You kind of you've been living in the past, I would say, like 10 years now, which is a constant ups and a very low downs and a very high ups, and it's kind of varies by day. And my wife has been, kind of my helper throughout the period within my co-founder, Tomer, which before starting to work remote, I was actually seeing him more than my wife in some cases. But I think, the lesson I would say of focus, how important it is. Sometimes, the most obvious things are the most important ones, specifically when it comes to kind of the breadth of everything you can do, but should you do it, right? And does it the right time to do something? And I'm more and more humbled, to learn with time that it's sometimes less is way more in many cases, specifically about when building products. Oh yeah, we can build it for everyone, but should you, right? Like, can we focus it down to a point where it's almost a little bit strange? Like, is it too small of a group that we're trying to solve the problem for? The more experience you get, the more kind of challenging it becomes to do things, I would say. When we started our first company, we'll build it, they will come kind of mentality. You have no fear, you have no idea what's coming up for you. So you are a little bit more, you can do things that you would maybe today I would kind of hold myself into because I know where it leads to. So you kind of a little bit more cautious, but with the experience. So I'm not always sure what's good or bad, right? So I would kind of hope to get this mentality of, let's just do it, don't think about the consequences too much. But with the more experience you're getting, you kind of start to think a little bit more. And this is something I'm trying to find always a good balance between, utilizing the past experience and learnings we've had versus not being blocked by, fear that you potentially know what might happen next.
So what kind of advice would you give to someone watching this now? Someone who's thinking of starting up their own company, or they're just very entrepreneurial in nature. You talked about some of the challenges there, but what other advice could you give to someone who wanted to maybe follow your path or similar?
Yeah, I think some of the areas which I've seen, and I've been working with founders quite a lot and kind of trying to help from our experience, going forward. A lot of the time I see people who find a very, I would say small problem. And the thing with it is, when you kind of focus on something so small without understanding the bigger picture of it, you will hit a wall at a specific point in time, right? And if the problem you're trying to solve is not big enough, you might not have another angle to it, right? So you might just building this small tool, and let's say tomorrow company X, or I don't know, like it happens a lot with the AI wrappers right now, like OpenAI comes and builds a feature, you kind of, suddenly you're losing your ground. And for us, with Novu, we've had a lot of, and still are, right, like trying to identify an angle of entry point of what is the right combination of product offering, messaging, and everything combined together. And it's very helpful to have a big problem to solve because you can always take a step back and try to attack it from a different angle. So I always suggest, like, you need to think big, but as I mentioned previously, you don't have to start like this, right? You have to start very small, but you have to understand the bigger picture a little bit. And I see a lot of people just, oh, I'm building a very niche tool for something like this, and then the moment it doesn't work, you don't have a lot of, things you can do because it was so tiny, like the surface area you can attach for. And yeah, that's, I would say, something that it's always important to think about. And everything is different. That not everything has to be a VC-backed business, and not the same rules apply to if you just want to do something, for yourself and have maybe a living out of it, versus you want to build a multi-billion company. It's a different, I would say, set of challenges and questions to ask.
There we go. Great advice from Dima there. So thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today. We really appreciate you coming on.
With pleasure. Thank you so much.
That was Dima Grossman, co-founder and CTO at Novu.